Welcome to Absolute Trust Talk with your host, Kirsten Howe. Absolute Trust Talk brings you tips, tools, advice, and interviews to help you build a reliable knowledge base on estate planning, business, and finance to start preparing for your future today.
Hello, and welcome to Absolute Trust Talk. I am Kirsten Howe. I'm here with one of our associate attorneys, Jessica Colbert. This is our video podcast at Absolute Trust Counsel. And today we are talking about AB trusts. And I think that this topic is very dense. We have a lot we could say about it. And so we may end up recording more than one episode. So just hang on to your seats. This episode, by the way, is really for married people. If you're single, you might find it interesting, but what we will be discussing is really not relevant to your estate plan until you get married. So today we're going to talk about what we call AB trusts. It's a very common estate planning technique that has, for many couples, really overstayed its welcome. And every month we see these trusts coming in the door with a new client who doesn't necessarily need one, doesn't know they have one, doesn't know why they have one. And when we explain it to them, they oftentimes don't want an AB trust. So we're going to start with the basics so everybody knows what we're talking about. Most people who have a written estate plan in California have a trust. What we're talking about here today can be done with a will as well, but we're just going to talk about it in terms of a trust. It still applies. You can do it in a will, but most people have trust. So that's why we're going to use that terminology. The trust document for a married couple has to say, among many other things, what is supposed to happen when the first spouse dies. Most married couples leave something, if not everything, to their surviving spouse. But there are many different ways that you can leave something or everything to your spouse. And that's where this AB trust comes in. So when you're drafting your married couple trust, well, you have many decisions to make, but one critical decision is figuring out how to leave property to your surviving spouse. There are other decisions that have to be made once you make that decision, but that base decision is, do I want to control my spouse and what my spouse does with my property after I die? So with an AB trust, you can allow your spouse to use your money after you die if they need it. But after your spouse dies, you get to control who gets it. Your spouse cannot change that. If you don't set your trust up as an AB trust, your spouse can do whatever they want with the property, including changing the estate plan after you die. Okay, so Jessica, talk to us about how that works exactly.
Yes. So on the death of the first spouse, if you have an AB trust, your singular trust would split into two separate trusts, the A trust and the B trust. And it'll be the survivor share and the deceased spouse's share. And the surviving spouse can change their surviving share trust. They can update it, they can change the beneficiaries, but they cannot change the deceased spouse's share. And so in that way, there is control over what your spouse can do with your share.
Right. The deceased spouse's share becomes irrevocable. That's why the survivor can't change it. And just as an aside, you may see in your own trust documents, you'll see that term survivor's trust, but you may see a variety of terms for the deceased spouse's trust. You might see it called a bypass trust. That's what we call it in our office. Sometimes it's called credit shelter trust, could be called family trust, decedent's trust. But whenever the trust says we have to split it into two, that's what we're talking about. And we have come to call it just informally AB. And I don't know how that ever started, but I do know there's a sort of mnemonic for that. And the A stands for above the ground and the B stands for below the ground. That's very dark humor. Sorry about that. Okay, so Jessica, why would someone want to control what their spouse does with their property after they die?
There could be a variety of reasons. It may be a situation where there's a blended family and both spouses have children from previous relationships, may be worried about the surviving spouse removing your children as beneficiaries. It may also be a concern that your spouse might be vulnerable to bad influence later down the road. There may be concerns about remarriage. The Pilates instructor comes in and, marries a hot young thing. There could be concerns about that.
Right. And we see this kind of concern, I would say, in our practice a little more commonly as our clients get older. When our clients are young and they've got young children, they've been married for only 10 years or something, they're really not thinking about becoming vulnerable as elderly people. But our older clients have maybe some real world experience around that. And they might think about that. So those definitely are valid reasons, but there is a trade-off. Let's talk about the negative aspects of having that AB structure.
Splitting the trust into 2 shares does cost money because it requires legal work to divide and retitle the assets. Also, the irrevocable trust, the deceased spouse's share, becomes a taxpayer. And so the surviving spouse does have to file a tax return every year for that trust. And then also, depending on what type of AB trust you have, the assets in the irrevocable trust may not get a step up in cost basis on the surviving spouse's death.
Okay. And a lot of times that's an important consideration. Each of those things is an important consideration. So, the trade-off in control comes with complexity, which means expense. Instead of having the AB, we could just say, I leave everything to my surviving spouse and there's no ongoing irrevocable trust. So that's certainly simpler and easier for our surviving spouse. And what exactly are we talking about when we say simpler and easier?
It's simpler and easier because it requires minimal legal work upon the death of the first spouse. And there are no tax returns, additional tax returns that the surviving spouse will have to file each year. And then the surviving spouse can change it, update it as they wish.
Right. Which is, definitely a plus for the survivor, but maybe the deceased spouse doesn't like that. All right. So even if a couple decides that they want the control that comes with this AB structure, that may not do it all for them. That might not be enough. And we are going to talk about that particular aspect of these AB trusts in our next episode. So I hope you got something out of this, and we look forward to connecting with you next time.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Absolute Trust Talk Live. If you enjoyed listening in, then don't forget to subscribe. You can find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you may listen by searching Absolute Trust Talk. While you're there, we would also love for you to leave us a review. And then why not share your favorite episodes with family, friends, or colleagues too? You can find all of our shows and corresponding show notes by visiting absolutetrustcouncil.com. You'll also find a variety of other free resources, including our ebooks, videos, blogs, presentations, and more. If you need help with your estate planning or administration, we also offer a free discovery call to help get the process started. You can find more information on booking your session by visiting absolutetrustcouncil.com/scheduling. If you join us for the broadcast, you can submit questions during the show. But if not, don't worry. You can always get in touch with us by sending a quick message to info@absolutetrustcouncil.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you soon.
This podcast is not meant to take the place of legal advice from an attorney and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you do have a legal question or issue, please consult with an attorney.